We're going to go back to this series we've been looking at. There's one more lesson after this. It's an 8-lesson course on strengthening our marriage, God's design for the family. And the one today is on how to stay faithful to your spouse. Now, the psalm or the Bible reading that accompanies this is Psalm 127 and 128. Let me give a admission right up here at the start. I don't consider myself a relationship expert, and I haven't had training in counseling in that. I feel like I've had pretty good relationships along the way, so I've kind of learned something, picked it up without really trying on that. But even if I was a relationship expert, or maybe I was a professional in marriage counseling, even if I was, what I would want to do when I get in this pulpit is preach God's Word. That's what we need. That's what needs to come from the pulpit. The strength of the church comes from its attention to God's Word, not necessarily looking at experts. Now, I looked over this material today, and there's a lot of good advice in it. I'd recommend you picking up a copy and say, well, that's not a problem for me and my marriage, and that's great that it's not. There can be some preventives here to see to it that it's not. And even if you're not married, there's just a lot of good ideas on relationships based on biblical principles there. I'm going to tell you what's in that material. The copies are out there. There's about 5 or 6 copies of this out there. And I'm going to tell you what's in that, but I'm going to concentrate on Psalm 127 and 128. And so part 2 of this sermon, you might title it The Rewards of Faithfulness. And I'll show you how that works in just a minute. But first, let me just kind of briefly go through what's in this material. 1, stay away from flirty people. If you want to, that just should make good sense, doesn't it? If someone's flirting with you and you're married, there's red flags right there. So I don't need to be around that. I hope that every married person here feels uncomfortable if they're around flirty people. That just is a thing right there. I just do not like that. And stay away. And don't be flirty. We'll get to that in just a minute. But stay away from flirty people. All right, the second one. Watch friendships with the opposite sex. Watch friendships. You know, these things can be so wholesome and beneficial. Friendships that you have with the opposite sex outside of your marriage. But be careful. Be careful. Those friendships can turn into something else if you're not aware of that, and your best friend is your spouse. Now, you remember that. Now, a lot of times, we got the home in our modern age. A lot of people working outside the home, men and women, coming in touch with all kinds of people out there, and it's good to have friendships, but keep a little distance. And make sure you know the boundaries, and just be careful. If you've got a friend that is of the opposite sex, then that's where you need to be careful, right there. Watch those friendships. Here's another one. Have a healthy relationship with your spouse. And we're going to talk about that a little bit. That is your best friend. And so nurture that. There is a love of attraction and passion, but there's a love of friendship that is greater than that. And make sure you're friends. And so the second kind of goes along with this. The next one, have fun with your spouse. Just make sure you're enjoying that relationship so that no other relationship can come in between this. That'll mess up the time I'm going to be spending and the activities I'm going to have with my best friend. And so, nurture that part. Now, we'll talk about this one. Have children and enjoy them together. Now, it's one thing to have children, And it's something else to enjoy them, isn't it? But you need to gotta have a sense of humor, and you need to enjoy your children together. And I'll tell you something children will do for you. Children take over. They just take over. And they do it before they're born. They've already taken over. Any woman that knows she's having it, all of a sudden her life is changed. And it'll change for her husband right then too. When hers changes, his changes right along with it. And children will get your mind off of yourself. You just, all of a sudden, when you have a child, self fades right into the background, and your children are more important than you are. And you will, when you have children, you're going to appreciate your parents when you have children. And I found out you're going to appreciate your grandparents when you have grandchildren. I saw what my grandparents, I just thought that's what they did. I didn't know how hard they must have worked to give us happy childhoods as grandparents. And so have children, and then when you start thinking, wait a minute, my relationship with my spouse, now that affects my children, and I'm not going to mess it up for them. And so that'll help you stay faithful to your spouse. Don't overestimate your strength. You get that, this isn't my problem, I got this. Man, this isn't a problem. And let him that thinketh he standeth take heed lest he fall. Don't let your guard down. You don't want to mess up this great part of your life by being unfaithful. That wrecks a home. In fact, that's the one thing God said, look, if your spouse does that, you can put them away and marry another. That's how bad that is. So don't let that happen. Don't let your guard down. Now, on this idea of do not overestimate your strength, there were some things under that. Recognize your weak points. Might be good to do a little self-examination here. I tell you, there's a big problem out there, and I guess I'm a little blind to it because this is not my problem. But when I hear about it, it kind of sickens me. And that is the pornography problem that is out there. That's not good for you. It's not good for women. It's not good for men. And evidently, and I tell you, I'm just not into that. But it must be readily available. And it's a big industry of billions of dollars. And it's something that can be done in secret. And it's destroying people. And so no, that's a problem. I'm not going to get into this. And we're all susceptible to these things if we're not careful. And so think about, where am I weak? And that's where I need strength. That's really where you need your spouse to help you. In areas where you are weak, confide that, and you deal with that together. Don't send mixed messages. That has to do with, now you stay away from flirty people, but don't you be a flirty person. You know, you can say things that mean two different things, and sometimes it's just a little wink or a smile or something that makes it sound like, well, I know I said that, but it sounds like, and you might think that's clever. You're playing with fire. Just don't send mixed messages like that. One thing I have done, and I have been in a professional career for years, working alongside men and closely working alongside women, and I was all over this country doing that. One thing I always kept in the back of my mind was just pretend like Lori's with me. When she was home with those children and I was out across this country somewhere where she could never see, and yet I would think, you know, if she were, I'm going to deal with this situation just like she's right here with me. And that's something that I would not be embarrassed. Now there's cameras everywhere. So think about that. Would I want my spouse watching this on camera, what I'm doing here, as I'm out here in this workplace with these other people, and just treat it in such a way that it wouldn't embarrass me? fact, I think she'd be proud of the way that I behaved and handled situations like that. So just use that and don't send mixed messages. Don't listen to a person of the opposite sex complain about their spouse. And don't complain about your spouse to someone of the opposite sex. Now, you talk about just asking for it, because that empathy and that sympathy, and then all of a sudden this thing can take root and come something ugly. Now, sometimes we have trouble with our spouse, don't we? And we got to talk to someone. Talk to someone. If you have to, the best thing, if you can, just deal with your spouse. Just kind of keep it tight. But sometimes that's not going to work. So find someone safe. Do you have a sister? Do you have a brother? Men, you have someone safe to talk to. You've got the elders. Talk to the elders. If an elder is to be an elder, one of the qualifications is they've been successful in that home, haven't they? And they've talked to the elders. You may want to talk to more than one of them. Sit down and say, I got to meet with the elders, and talk with the elders. Now, women, you can talk to the elders too, but you may not want to talk to one unless you're talking to that elder with his wife. But you could talk to multiple elders. Just don't let this thing get too personal here if you're having problems with your spouse. And a lot of these problems aren't things you need to talk about. I mean, that's true a lot. But here's something else, women, you can talk to. Talk to elders' wives. Just by nature of the fact that they're the wives of the elders, they're the elderly women, and they've been successful at this. So the thing is, you may not have to talk about it. If you do, make sure it is someone safe, that there's really not a possibility of this thing spinning out of control here. You may want to avoid talking to your parents. I know that's often a good place to go, but sometimes, boy, when you start putting husband against in-laws or wife against those in-laws, and that doesn't always work out good. Find someone safe so that this can't turn into something bad. So be careful about that. And if someone don't let them confide in you. Don't let them, if they're the opposite sex, suggest someone they might need to talk to. But that could turn into something awful. Be especially careful when you're out of your routine. And a lot of us have routines, and we live good, decent lives in our routine. But then something happens, and we're thrown out of our routine. Now, this could cause problems. I'm not going to let this throw me. That happens on work trips, see? Things like the good, innocent, good things to do, but yet it throws you out of your routine, and then just know those are danger points right there. Vacations. Someone said, whose marriage broke up, says, don't ever go on separate vacations. Now that's their idea, but that's what messed up their marriage, going on separate vacations. So his idea was just don't ever do that. So that's some advice. Now I've got one. It wasn't in the material, but this is the one that I have focused on all my life, right here. Well, no, not that one. That one is in the keep visual reminder. A wedding ring's a good thing. A wedding ring, it just kind of says, I've been had, okay? So nobody, you got this wedding ring. Don't be taking that wedding ring off. I know a fella that used to say he always took a picture of his wife with him when he went to these motel rooms on his business trips. And when he'd unpack his suitcase, he'd just set that picture right up by the bedside just to keep that reminder there. And if you're away from your spouse, I'll tell you what, we got this right here. She's right here. And you don't even have to talk. You can FaceTime. I remember I was separated from Lori once for about 9 months during one of our moves, going to North Carolina. My kids were in school, and about every 3 weeks I'd drive from Greensboro, North Carolina, all the way to Little Rock, Arkansas, and spend the weekend with my family and drive back. And you talk about wearing me out. I did it, but it's my family. So I did that about every 3 weeks. But then I'd go grocery shopping, and what I'd do, I'd get my cell phone, and then we'd either talk or FaceTime while I was grocery shopping, and she'd tell me what I ought to get and ought to avoid, while I was going through the grocery store. So that was better than me looking around trying to ask somebody if they knew where something was. I could call Lori, and she usually even hadn't been in the grocery store, knew where I should look. So you can keep in touch and keep those reminders there. But now here's the one that I've used right here. I got this one from Joseph, and I read it before Sunday school this morning. If you don't know the story, go back and read Genesis 39. How can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? That'll do it. You see, all these things we're talking about, they're just kind of fringe things. You know what the core is? The center of all this is God. There's a God to answer to. God is to be in all of our thoughts. You build your home on God. You build that relationship on God. Yeah, there'll be problems. Life throws things at us. We change through life. Things happen in life. And things keep shifting around. How do you keep that home intact? How do you keep that relationship with your spouse right? And never break those wedding vows that you made. It's God. God's in your marriage from day one. It's what God hath joined together. And don't let... You learn to do that in everything in life. God is always there. The last word, how can I do this great way? It's a sin against God. And never, I've heard it, and it just kind of makes me sick when someone has been unfaithful to their spouse, and then they come up with all these things. It's like, are they trying to justify this by what they say? Well, now their spouse did this, and they were this way, and you just don't understand. And it was no. God wants you to be faithful, and He would not expect something out of you you couldn't do. So you're responsible for this. Don't do this great wickedness and sin against God. And then all the rest are the little helps maybe that can just help you cope with things and make it a little easier. But if you've got that, everything else can go wrong. But you're not going to do wrong because you're committed to God. Now, let's go to the rewards of faithfulness the next few minutes. I want you to notice the children in these two Psalms. Notice the children. Psalm 127 and 128. The Song of Degrees for Solomon. Except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. Except the Lord keep the city, the watchman walketh but in vain. It's vain for you to rise up early and to sit up late and to eat the bread of sorrows, for He giveth His beloved sleep. Lo, children are an heritage of the Lord. The fruit of the womb is His reward. As arrows in the hand of a mighty man, so are the children of youth. Happy is the man that hath his quiver full of them. They shall not be ashamed, but they shall speak with the enemies in the gate. Let's go to Psalm 128. Blessed is every one that feareth the Lord, that walketh in His ways. For thou shalt eat the labor of thy hands. Happy shalt thou be, and it shall be well with thee. Thy wife shall be as a fruitful vine beside the sides of thine house. Thy children like olive plants round about thy table. Behold, that thus shall the man be blessed that feareth the Lord. The Lord shall bless thee out of Zion. He shall see the good of Jerusalem all the days of thy life. Yea, thou shalt see thy children's children. And peace upon Israel. Let's go back through those two Psalms now. Look at this. Except the Lord build the house. What house? What house? Well, David, this is a song of degrees. I won't get into that now, but it was for Solomon. Solomon was to build the temple. Could this be the temple? Could that be the house? It's the house of the Lord. And God had given David a pattern to follow to build the house. You want this to please the Lord? Well, you go out and do it your own way, it's going to be in vain. You got to follow the Lord's pattern. Do it the Lord's way. Could it be the church? That's the household of God. We read in the New Testament about a church. We read all about it in the epistles. We can look at that and infer things from what we read about what the church ought to be. You want a real popular big church where everybody's happy and people just love to go, and go take a survey of the community and build a church after the community pattern, but it'll be in vain. It won't be the Lord's church. But could it be your home? That house. You see, God has a plan for the home. That's what this whole series of lessons is about. You want a good home? Well, now, don't go into this same-sex stuff. Don't go into multiple partner things. That's not the way you're going to have a good home. And it's not going to bring you the satisfaction and spiritual fulfillment and strength it's supposed to bring you unless you do it the Lord's way. It'll be in vain. And they labor in vain that build it. And then this part about rising early and staying up late to eat the bread of sorrow, no matter how hard you work at it, if it's not doing it the Lord's way, it's not going to accomplish its purpose. Not the Lord's purpose. But if you do things the Lord's way, troubles come, and they can keep you up at night. But as you think through, okay, how did we get here? What are we doing? And you think, you know, one thing we've done, at least we're doing it the Lord's way. That gives such a comfort. I like one fella said, you do things the Lord's way, you can sleep in the mouth of a cannon because you're doing what's right. And that'll give you sleep. Now, then we got the children, the heritage of the Lord, His reward. Children are not the problem. Children are a joy. And people that are so wrapped up in their own lives that they say, no, children will be our problem. No, children are a joy. And so embrace children, love children, and have children. It says, and it's the arrows in the man, so are the children of youth. You know, I've come to appreciate that. God gives children to young people. I tell you, it takes a lot to look after children. And here I am, a grandpa, and I start looking after my grandchildren, and I can't hardly keep up with it. I did a lot better when I was a young man looking after children, and I wasn't all that wise, but at least I had the energy to overcome some of my foolishness. And so children go good with young people. Young people with children. It's God's plan. And then it says, happy is the man. Children bring joy. Children bring happiness. And look at this man. He's got his quiver full of them. Well, now, I had thought for a while maybe that means you just, you just quiver because of your children. But it's talking about where you keep your arrows. Arrows in the hand of a mighty man. Just like having a quiver full of arrows. And when you sit down with the men in the gates, I've done this in my professional life. I've sat down with the men, and I was a family man. I had children. I had something that some of those men had forsaken or did not have, and it gave me great strength. And people respected that. So you can sit with your enemies in the gates. Psalm 128, blessed is everyone that feareth the Lord and walketh in his ways, for thou shalt eat the labor of thy hands. Happy, there's that happiness. Happy shalt thou be, it shall be well with thee, and then thy wife, as a fruitful vine beside the sides of thy house. I used to have a jasmine vine growing by the side of my house. It was pretty. The winter came along and got it. But I'll tell you what, the prettiest thing at my house is my wife. I just love coming home to her in my house. And she is the decoration of my home. And she's at the house. Now, when I come home, she's there. And she is by my house. Now, children like olive plants round about the table. I see a picnic table in the trees, but just think all the... You look, one of the greatest times we've had as a family. When I had all my little children up, when we'd sit around that table at supper. We'd all show up in supper time together. Lori worked so hard to make sure we had a good food on the table. And we'd set the table, the kids would help set the table and clean the dishes up. But we'd all gather around that table. That's where we would pray together. That's where we would talk with one another. And we would laugh and tell stories and just all the memories I have around that supper table. I think of that like the olive trees sitting around the table. That's how the children are, blessing those meals together. Every meal, every supper meal, we'd sit together like that was like a celebration. Now, you don't want to mess that up. See, that'll help you stay faithful because you think, boy, I've got such a benefit and joy here. I'm not going to mess this up. And so the children around the table. Now, I need some help from the older women here to help me out and back me up because I've gotten in real bad trouble on this one verse. It does say she'll be at the sides of the house, the wife and the house. Now, my theory's always been we've bought a bunch of houses. It's always been her house, and I get to live there, okay? But it's the wife that makes that house the home. I might be able to supply the lumber and the bricks and the mortar and keep the air conditioner running and all, but she's the one she's the spirit of that house. Aged women, now here's where I need your help. Teach the younger women to love their husbands, to love their children, and to be keepers at home. Now that doesn't say teach the women to stay home. That's not what it said. But the keepers at home, show the younger women, you older women, help me do this. Show the younger women how to have a good home and how to keep it. Women can do all kinds of things in this world. The professional world beckons the talents and the skills and the abilities and will reward them greatly for stepping out of the home and going out in the world and becoming successful in all kinds of things. But remember this, women, everywhere you go, you're replaceable except your home. You're irreplaceable there. That's your priority. And don't let all these other opportunities and things that are out there calling for you, don't let them take that. You make that the priority where you're irreplaceable. And you let your husband have that pride in you and your home that this man has in that vine growing by his house. Now, 1 Timothy 2:15 says, she shall be saved in childbearing. What's that talking about? Well, it's talking about roles that men and women play. It doesn't mean women have to have children to be saved. But it does mean that there's certain things that women do that are just suited for them. And pointing out an example of what that is, the Lord mentioned childbearing. Now that just shows the importance that God puts on that role with children, women and children. Now, Thou shalt see the good of Jerusalem. See, this will help the whole community. Good homes make good communities. And then this last, you'll see your children's children. Think long term. My decisions have long-term effects. If I mess this up now in my little home, what's that going to be? What's that going to mean when Christmas and Thanksgiving time comes and birthdays and family get-togethers and funerals and weddings? I want that to be good times. My children's children. And their joy is going to be my reward. Now, let's end with Psalm 128, verse 1 and verse 4, and this gets back to God. Blessed is everyone that feareth the Lord, that walketh in his ways. Behold, that thus shall be the man that is blessed that feareth the Lord. How can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? Go God's way. Build your house according to God's plan. Use God's pattern. And the rest of these things, you see, seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. All these things will be added to you. The rest will fall in place. You need a Christian home. And that means you're a Christian. And that means that every responsible person in that home is Christian. The husband and the wife and the children as they grow to be accountable. And that will give you that good home. So if you need to respond to the invitation to become a Christian this morning, then do it while we stand and sing.